do is just ask you to kind of back up and talk about
Sure.
your history.
My name is Frank Gaughan. I'm a assistant professor. I just applied for tenure at Hofstra University, and our department is the Writing Studies and Composition department, which 2 to 3 years ago departed from the English department, or formed out of the English department, and so that puts me in a sort of unique institutional context, and that's, I think, an increasing trend you'll find as composition becomes a discipline that, or establishes itself as a discipline, that more and more programs will sort of try to seek out their own turf, although many of them still operate under the auspices of an English department.
And can you talk a little bit about, you came out of a lit background? And
Right, like many of us, who work in composition rhetoric, I got my bachelor's degree at Queens College in an English program, and then, like many people went to graduate school, I went there because there was a lack of jobs at the time. I graduated in 1993, and I was interested in writing more so than literature. Maybe that's a selfish thing. I'm more interested in writing than reading. And I found that many people in English studies were perhaps more interested in reading and then writing about what they had read. And so I thought that rhetoric and composition was an area that would allow me the space to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, which at the time involved more, I would say, more imaginative and, let's say, journalistic work. Now, as composition increasingly asserts its disciplinary credentials, that becomes less and less so, because the drive is much more towards scholarship and research than it is towards, let's say, kind of process writing-based narratives, which is the way it was, or which was my impression of the field when I was a young pup many years ago.
And what kinds of research have you yourself been doing? What kinds of publishing have you done in the years that you've been teaching at my time?
I was interested in, and I had noticed a while ago that not just within Hofstra, but within other places, that composition and rhetoric was going in a different direction than English studies, and so I was really interested in what we're losing from that, and also obviously there are things to be gained, or it wouldn't be going in that direction, but what gets lost when you try to establish your own space there, separate from these traditions, the disciplinary traditions. And so I was also interested in collaboration, because I thought that made writing more fun. It also makes it a lot more work, although that's not the impression. They say, oh, well, that's half the work because you collaborated, but really if you've done any collaboration, you know it's like triple the work. So I was interested in collaboration, so I worked with a colleague on a book called Collaborating Literature and Composition. And we were interested in what happens when literature and composition as fields collaborate, because these fields have been in tension for some time, since the beginnings at Harvard in the late 19th century of established writing programs. These two areas of what I see to be a broad field have been in tension. And so I was interested in exploring that avenue, so we put together a collected journal, an edition of collected essays, and we were also interested in that way in what Peter Coast and I, as my collaborator, called literature and composition. So we wanted to know what would happen if you approach composition from a literary perspective. In other words, that involves sort of writing hybrid essays. It involves narrative. It involves playing with scholarship, as opposed to doing a sort of qualitative research-based analysis of a particular problem or text.
Did you get any advice, good or bad, about what kinds of research would be valued, what kinds of research you should be doing?
I think you pick it up, right? Because you know you have to.
Let me back up. Can you just sort of repeat or build in my question to that when I was starting out, I've been told a variety of things about what kinds of research I'm doing. Just something that they're going to edit me out of this.
Oh, so people can know what to.
Right.
When I first started, there's a lot of advice that you receive as a graduate student and as an assistant professor. They try very hard to mentor you, and also you pick things up. You look at journals and you look at what's being published, and then a lot of CFPs come out over the internet. I don't know if there still is. There used to be a UPenn list where you would get, there was 10, 20 a day of people producing projects or different conferences going on. And just by exposure to all that, you get a sense of trends. But until you have sort of a scholarly identity, you're kind of left almost like, I felt it at one point almost like a teenager. one day you have a purple mohawk, and the next day, you're all sort of prepped out, and so you're trying on these different things. Who am I? Am I a computers and composition type of person? Am I a sort of narrative kind of person? Am I somebody who's interested in writing across the curriculum? And then to a certain degree, you try all of these things, and the field, any academic field, I think, really pushes towards some sort of specialization. And I've been on either side of a job table where that's the question. You see all these CVs in front of you. You say, well, who is this person? Is he going to be, and whether it's in English, is he going to be our 19th century guy, or is she going to be our computers and composition person? And these things, I think, ultimately are detrimental, because I guess I have a widely ranging interest in a number of things, and I'd like to be able to work. Why can't I write about Shakespeare? Well, that territory is occupied. And so if I were to start, let's say, if I write an article or I have a conference presentation that concerns Shakespeare or Chaucer or even another aspect of composition that I'm not involved with right now, let's say computers, maybe I'm interested in that. But then on a CV, it starts to make my narrative line, my career narrative, look jumbled, or without. It's as if your career doesn't have a thesis. And so that's sort of one piece of advice I got, that I understand it's valuable advice, and I can't argue with it, because I've seen it play out. It's very true that your career needs a thesis, but I think people are pushed, especially graduate students, are pushed to develop that thesis too early. And in the same way that you can ruin a paper by pushing very hard early on for what is this about? What is this about? You won't ruin your career, but you might not have as much fun with it. And let's face facts, we're not going to make a whole lot of money doing this, so there ought to be an aspect of fun here. And then that also is the thing that keeps the disciplines and the intellectual community vibrant, that people are curious and having fun with their work.
That was great.
Thanks.
I would ask you if you could say one thing to a new faculty member, what would it be? But before I do that, why don't you look at your notes and tell me if there are other things that you had that you would like to talk about that we haven't?
Not necessarily. I was hoping this would go kind of this way, Jenny, because I was like, geez, if I get that question, I hope she doesn't ask that one. I don't know.
Notes on each one of those, is it notes on each of the questions?
I'm just free riding. I'm moving real quick. Yeah.
Impressed.
It took me about 45 minutes, but I wanted to have it in case there's like, if you ask me that one, I want to be.
Actually, let me ask you two more things. One is, how does the research that you do impact your teaching? What influence does it have in your classroom?
It's a really good question. The research that I do, I think that research and teaching always need to complement each other first of all, for survival reasons. If you're always designing a class and those classes don't inform the work that you're doing, then you're essentially working two jobs. You're working 80-hour weeks, and you're going to go a little nuts. You're going to burn out. But also, it negatively affects your research and negatively affects your teaching. Our students are incredibly astute critics, because they always that question about your thesis. So what? Your thesis should answer. So students are constantly asking, so what? And your answers are never ever good enough for them. And so I think that when you try to bring that research into your classroom, then they're going to ask, what is this doing for me? Why does this matter? Why do we have to do this? And so I've recently become interested in ways that we can use the essay, or imagine the academic essay. I'd like to imagine the academic essay more broadly than we have envisioned it as you see it play out in journals currently. There's sort of a predictable pattern now where I explain the work that you did, and then I say what's wrong with your work, and then I tell you why my work is better. Or I say that up to this point we've been talking about this, and we should stop talking about this, and we should start talking more about this other thing. It's sort of a pattern that I see in various places, and I think that's there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it's also limiting, and there are a lot of other choices. And so I'd like to imagine the essay as something that's creative and hybrid and polyvoiced and flexible. Now, how do you translate that into student text, which are, especially when they come out of certain high school environments where everything is driven towards a test, and the SAT test is a 25-minute essay, so you can imagine how formula-driven that is. And so when I'm imagining how to work with an academic professional essay flexibly, then I'm asking them simultaneously to imagine their own academic texts as something other than thesis in the last sentence of the first paragraph and topic sentence, and then here's my evidence. And I tell them that they already know how to do that, believe it or not. And I heard a great line from Louis Simmons, who's a power lifter. There's an interesting intersection, right? The guy, I think he squats like with 900 pounds on his back. He says, once you learn how to do something, you can only do it wrong afterwards. You learn how to write your name, then you can only do it wrong after that. So try new things, was sort of his message. It sounds better when he says it. He's very gruff. He looks like a fire plug. But I think that's it. They already know that. And if they're not executing it right, maybe it has more to do with their level of interest and motivation to do the execution. And so I think that if the question is how to make you a better writer and thinker, not how to make you a better writer of a thesis that appears in the last sentence of the first paragraph. And so I think that that's one way that, at least right now, that I'm trying to experiment with that flexible essay model, both in professional and in student-based settings.
So let's skip to the one that I mentioned. If you could say one thing to somebody coming out of graduate school, going into their first job about research, or comes to research, what would it be?
Well, that would go back to my earlier answer about having fun and not developing. Be aware of the need for a professional identity, and don't develop one too quickly. I'm not a very good networker. A lot of people, that's sort of another common line of advice. They go to these conferences, you meet people, you talk to people. That's good advice. I don't do that very well either, so I don't know that I would necessarily give that bit of advice to somebody. But I try to be aware, sort of broader trends that are happening, and then from those trends, kind of make my own, or combine them in some way that's interesting to me. And I've had some success with that, and so I think that's good advice.
Great. Okay.
Done? Awesome.
Anything on your list?
No, I want to see how I answered that question, because I know I answered it differently in writing.